What would you do if your own family tried to steal the house you built with your bare hands? I'm talking moving trucks, wedding planners, and a legal battle that almost cost me everything. But here's the twist. What I discovered about my inheritance changed everything. This is how I fought back and won. Back. This all-glass house. It nearly slipped through my fingers. But before I tell you how I almost lost everything, let me take you back to where it all started. 3 months ago, I was living in a cramped studio apartment working 2 jobs just to pay rent. The kind of place where you could touch both walls if you spread your arms wide. My neighbors upstairs had a baby that cried every night at 2 a.m., and the guy next door played his music so loud I could feel the bass vibrating through my pillow. I'd wake up every morning, look at myself in that cracked bathroom mirror, and wonder if this was it. If this was all my life would ever be. Paycheck to paycheck, counting quarters for laundry, eating ramen for dinner 4 nights a week. But I had this one thing, this one dream that kept me going. My grandfather's house. Now, when I say house, I don't mean some little cottage with a white picket fence. I'm talking about a 5-bedroom Victorian mansion sitting on 12 acres of prime real estate. The kind of property that real estate agents dream about. The kind that makes people stop their cars just to stare through the iron gates. Grandpa built that place with his own hands back in 1952. Started with nothing, but a piece of raw land and a vision. He told me stories about laying every brick, planting every tree, designing every room with the precision of an architect. That house wasn't just his home. It was his masterpiece, and he promised it to me. I was 8 years old when he first took me up to the attic, showed me the blueprints spread across his old wooden desk. The paper was yellowed with age corners, soft from being handled so many times. He pointed to each room, each detail explaining his vision, like he was sharing state secrets. "This will be yours someday, Alex," he said, his weathered hands tracing the lines he'd drawn decades before. Every beam, every stone, every memory built into these walls. "You're the one who understands what this place means." And I did understand. Even at 8 years old, I felt something magical about that house. The way the morning light streamed through the stained glass windows in the front hall. The way the hardwood floors creaked in just the right spots, like the house was talking to you. The smell of old books and lemon oil that seemed to live in the walls themselves. My cousins never cared about any of that. When we'd visit for holidays, they'd run straight to the basement to play video games or hide in their room scrolling on their phones. But I'd follow Grandpa around like a shadow, asking him about every detail. Why did he choose oak for the stairs? What made him decide on that particular shade of blue for the dining room? How did he know exactly where to place each window to catch the best light? He'd answer every question with the patience of a man who'd been waiting his whole life for someone to ask. "You see it, don't you?" he'd say, watching me run my small fingers along the intricate woodwork. "You see what this place really is." I saw it. I saw the love. I saw the decades of careful planning and meticulous craftsmanship. I saw a home that wasn't just built, but created with intention and soul. That's why, when Grandpa got sick, I was the one who moved in to take care of him. While my cousin sent generic get-well cards from 3 states away, I was there every day, helping him with his medication, making sure he ate, listening to his stories about the old days. Those last 6 months weren't easy. Watching someone you love fade away never is. But I treasured every conversation, every shared meal, every quiet evening when he'd tell me about his plans for the property. How he wanted to expand the garden, where he thought a greenhouse might look perfect. His dreams for the next generation. My dreams. The night before he passed, Grandpa called me to his bedside. His voice was weak, but his eyes were clear and determined. "The house is yours, Alex," he whispered, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "I've made sure of it. The will is clear. This place, everything I've built, it belongs to you now. You're the only one who truly loves it the way I do." I cried that night. Not just because I was losing him, but because I felt the weight of his trust. his legacy settling on my shoulders. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a responsibility, a sacred trust passed from one generation to the next. 2 weeks after the funeral, we all gathered in the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. I sat in that sterile conference room surrounded by relatives who'd barely spoken to Grandpa in years and waited to hear the words that would change my life forever. The lawyer cleared his throat and began to read. To my beloved grandson, Alex, who has shown me more love and dedication than I ever deserved, who understands the true value of the home I built with my own hands, I leave my entire estate. The silence in that room was deafening. I felt my heart swell with gratitude and grief and overwhelming responsibility all at once. Grandpa had kept his promise. The house, the land, everything was mine. But that feeling lasted exactly 37 seconds. Because that's when Cousin Marcus stood up, his face red with anger, and said the words that would haunt me for the next 3 months. This is bullshit. That old man wasn't in his right mind when he wrote this will. We're contesting it. My Aunt Sarah nodded vigorously from across the table. Alex manipulated him, moved in and brainwashed him when he was vulnerable. This isn't what Dad really wanted. Uncle Jim, who I hadn't seen since Christmas 2 years ago, suddenly became very interested in family loyalty. That house belongs to all of us. It's been in the family for 70 years. One person shouldn't get everything. One by one, they lined up against me. Cousins who couldn't remember Grandpa's birthday were suddenly experts on his mental state. Relatives who'd never spent more than a holiday weekend at the house were now passionate about preserving family traditions. The lawyer tried to maintain order, but the damage was done. Within a week, I had legal papers delivered to my studio apartment. Official documents challenging the will, questioning Grandpa's competency, demanding a full investigation into my relationship with him during his final months. They painted me as a manipulator, a gold digger who'd taken advantage of an elderly man's loneliness. They claimed I'd isolated him from his family, poisoned his mind against them, convinced him to change his will in my favor. None of it was true. But truth doesn't matter when you're dealing with lawyers and family members who smell money. The worst part wasn't the legal battle. It was the way they talked about Grandpa, like he was some confused old man who didn't know his own mind. Like the careful, deliberate decision he'd made to leave me his life's work was just the rambling of someone losing his grip on reality. They didn't understand what that house meant to him, what it meant to me. To them, it was just valuable real estate. A pile of bricks and wood that could be sold for a nice profit, divided up equally among people who'd never appreciated what Grandpa had built. But I knew better. I knew that house was alive with his dreams, his hopes, his vision for the future. I knew every room held memories that couldn't be appraised or divided. I knew that selling it would be like erasing everything he'd worked for, everything he'd believed in. So I fought. I spent my life savings on legal fees. I worked 3 jobs to pay my lawyer, barely sleeping, living on coffee and determination. I gathered evidence of my relationship with Grandpa. Photos of us working in the garden together, videos of him explaining his renovation plans. Letters he'd written to me over the years, talking about his hopes for the property. For 3 months, my life became a blur of depositions and court dates and desperate phone calls to anyone who might testify on my behalf. I lost 15 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. I developed stress-related insomnia that left me looking like a ghost. My cousins, meanwhile, hired the most expensive law firm in the county. They had money I didn't have, connections I couldn't match, and a unified front that seemed unbreakable. They also had something else I didn't expect, a secret that would change everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because what happened next, what I discovered about my family, about myself, about the true nature of the house I was fighting for, that's a story that starts with a single phone call that came at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. A call that would reveal the truth about who I really am. And why that house was never really Grandpa's to give away in the first place. That phone call I mentioned, it came from Jordan, the one person who'd been by my side through this entire nightmare. But let me back up and tell you how I got to that point. How a kid who used to draw blueprints on napkins ended up fighting for his life in a courtroom. See, my obsession with architecture didn't start when I was 8. It started when I was 5, sitting on Grandpa's kitchen floor with a box of crayons and whatever paper I could find. While other kids were drawing stick figures and rainbows, I was sketching floor plans. I didn't even know what they were called back then. I just knew that rooms had to connect in ways that made sense. That hallways needed to lead somewhere important. That windows should be placed where they'd bring in the most light at the right time of day. My parents thought it was cute at first. "Look at little Alex playing architect," Mom would say, showing my drawings to anyone who'd listen. But as I got older, as my sketches became more detailed and my questions more technical, that amusement turned into something else. Concern. It's not normal for a 12-year-old to spend his weekends measuring rooms and calculating square footage, Dad said one evening watching me work on my latest design. I was creating an addition to our house, complete with structural supports and electrical layouts I'd researched at the library. "Maybe we should get him into sports," Mom suggested. "Something more social." But I didn't want to be social. I wanted to understand how buildings worked, how spaces could make people feel safe or inspired or peaceful, how the right design could change someone's entire life. Grandpa was the only one who understood. Every summer, I'd spend weeks at his house and we'd work on projects together. Not just maintaining what he'd built, but improving it. Adding a screened porch when I was 10. Redesigning the basement workshop when I was 12. Planning a guest cottage that we never quite got around to building. He taught me to use real tools to read actual blueprints, to think like a builder, and not just a dreamer. But more than that, he taught me that architecture wasn't just about making pretty buildings. It was about creating spaces where life could flourish. "A house isn't just walls and a roof, Alex," he'd say, watching me measure twice before cutting a piece of trim. "It's a container for human dreams. Every line you draw, every space you create, it's going to shape how people live, how they feel, how they remember their time on this earth." That's when I knew. This wasn't just a hobby or a phase I'd grow out of. This was my calling. The problem was my parents had different plans. "Architecture is a risky field," Dad explained when I told them I wanted to study it in college. "Feast or famine, lots of competition. You should consider something more stable. Engineering maybe, or business." Mom nodded along. "Your cousin Amanda is studying business management. She's going to graduate debt-free because we've been saving for her education since she was born. We could help you too if you choose something practical." Amanda, my perfect cousin who'd never shown the slightest interest in Grandpa's house, who complained every time she had to visit because there was no good cell service, who once asked if we could just sell the place and split the money. The same Amanda who was getting a full ride through college courtesy of my aunt and uncle's college fund. Books, tuition, housing, even spending money for weekend trips and sorority fees. Everything handed to her on a silver platter while she studied something she'd probably never use because she was already planning to marry her high school boyfriend and be a stay-at-home mom. Not that there's anything wrong with that choice, but the contrast was impossible to ignore. When I insisted on architecture school, the financial support disappeared. "If you want to chase this dream, you'll have to find your own way to pay for it," Dad said. Not cruel, just practical. That was always his approach to everything. So I found my own way. My first job was washing dishes at a diner near campus. 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. Monday through Friday, just to cover my meal plan. The kitchen was always sweltering, the work was mindless, and I smelled like grease no matter how much I showered. But I didn't mind. Every plate I scrubbed was bringing me closer to my goal. My second job was stocking shelves at a grocery store. Evenings and weekends loading cases of soda and arranging cereal boxes in perfect rows. The manager was a 20-something guy who took sadistic pleasure in making college students clean up messes in aisle 7 that somehow always involved broken jars of pickles. Still, didn't mind. Because while I was working, I was also learning. I'd bring architecture textbooks to read during my breaks. I'd sketch building designs on the back of my timesheets. I'd study for exams in the break room between shifts surrounded by cases of canned tomatoes and industrial-sized boxes of breakfast cereal. My classmates thought I was crazy. Most of them had parents who paid their tuition, bought their supplies, covered their rent. They could focus entirely on their studies while I was running on 4 hours of sleep and caffeine trying to balance work and school and somehow still find time to complete studio projects that required 40 hours a week of focused attention. "Why don't you just take out more student loans?" my roommate asked, watching me calculate how many extra shifts I'd need to pick up to afford the specialized software our professors required. Because I'd seen what student debt could do. I'd watched older students graduate with degrees they loved and skills they'd worked years to develop, only to take jobs they hated because they needed to service loans that would follow them for decades. I was determined to graduate debt-free no matter what it cost me in sleep and social life and weekend plans I couldn't afford anyway. The scholarship helped. A partial merit scholarship that covered about 30% of my tuition renewable each year, as long as I maintained a 3.8 GPA. It wasn't much, but it was something. Recognition that my work was worth supporting, even if my family wasn't ready to provide that support themselves. Meanwhile, Amanda was posting Instagram photos from her study abroad semester in Italy. Business classes in Florence, weekend trips to Paris, designer clothes she could afford because her parents were covering everything else. Her biggest concern was choosing between 2 internships at companies where her dad had connections. I tried not to feel bitter about it. Everyone's path is different. Everyone's family situation is unique. But late at night, when I was falling asleep over my drafting table, after a double shift at the grocery store, it was hard not to wonder what I could accomplish if I had just a fraction of the support she took for granted. That's where Jordan comes in. I met Jordan in my second year in a structures class that was notorious for weeding out students who weren't serious about the profession. Half the class would drop out before midterms, unable to handle the mathematical intensity and spatial reasoning required to understand how buildings actually stand up. Jordan was struggling. Not because of lack of intelligence, but because of lack of foundation. A transfer student from a liberal arts school trying to switch careers after discovering that a philosophy degree wasn't opening the doors they'd hoped for. I found Jordan in the library at 2 a.m, surrounded by textbooks and looking like they were about to cry over a load calculation that should have been straightforward. "Need help?" I asked, settling into the chair across from them. "I don't understand how you're supposed to know where the forces go," Jordan said, gesturing helplessly at a diagram of a beam under stress. "Like, I can see that there's weight pressing down, but how do you know which parts of the beam are going to fail first?" I spent the next 3 hours explaining structural principles in terms that made sense to someone with a humanities background, using metaphors about stress and tension that Jordan could relate to, breaking down complex engineering concepts into human-scale analogies. "You're really good at this," Jordan said, as the library started to fill with early morning studiers. "Have you thought about tutoring? You could probably make decent money helping people like me who are drowning in the technical stuff." I hadn't thought about it, but within a week I had 5 regular tutoring clients and a new source of income that paid better than either of my other jobs. More importantly, I had a friend who understood what it meant to fight for something you wanted. Jordan and I became study partners, then close friends, then something more than friends. Not in a romantic way, but in a way that's deeper than romance sometimes. Jordan became my chosen family, the person who understood my dreams and supported my ambitions without question or condition. When I was working too many hours and falling behind in studio, Jordan would bring me coffee and sit with me while I worked just so I wouldn't feel alone. When I couldn't afford the materials for a major project, Jordan would contribute what they could from their own tight budget, never making me feel like charity case. "We're both crazy for doing this," Jordan would say during our late-night study sessions. "Trying to build careers in a field that chews people up and spits them out, but at least we're crazy together." Jordan was the one who helped me see that my work-study-work schedule wasn't just about survival. It was teaching me things my classmates weren't learning: time management, resourcefulness, the ability to find creative solutions when conventional resources weren't available. "You know how to make something beautiful out of nothing," Jordan observed, watching me create a presentation model using cardboard and borrowed supplies because I couldn't afford the foam core and precision materials most students used. "That's not a skill you learn in a classroom. That's something you only get from necessity." Jordan was right. While my classmates were learning to design with unlimited budgets and ideal conditions, I was learning to create within constraints, to find beauty in simplicity, to understand that the best solutions often come from having to work within limitations rather than having every option available. Those skills served me well in school and later in my career. While other graduates struggled to adapt their grand visions to real-world budgets and building codes, I already knew how to design for the possible rather than the perfect. But more than that, Jordan taught me to value the journey I was on, to see my struggles not as obstacles to overcome, but as experiences that were shaping me into the kind of architect and the kind of person I wanted to become. "Your cousin Amanda might graduate without debt," Jordan said one evening, helping me calculate whether I could afford both groceries and art supplies that week. "But she'll never have the grit you're developing. She'll never understand what it means to really want something, to fight for it, to sacrifice for it. That's going to matter more than money in the long run." I wasn't sure I believed that at the time. When you're eating ramen for the fourth night in a row while your cousin posts photos of her weekend shopping trips, it's hard to feel like you're winning. But Jordan had a way of helping me see the bigger picture, of reminding me that the house I was fighting for, the career I was building, the person I was becoming, all of it was connected. All of it was worth the struggle. Which is why, 3 months after Grandpa's funeral, when my legal bills were mounting and my family was closing ranks against me, when I was seriously considering giving up the fight for the house, just to make the nightmare stop, Jordan was the one who called me at 3 in the morning with information that would change everything. "Alex." Jordan's voice was tight with excitement and something else I couldn't identify. "I've been doing research on your grandfather's property. Looking into the deed history, the original land grants anything that might help your case." I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "What did you find?" "You need to sit down for this. Actually, you need to call your lawyer right now, because what I found isn't just going to save your inheritance." Jordan paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "It's going to prove that your family has been lying to you about who you really are." But before I tell you what Jordan discovered that night, I need to take you back 5 years earlier. Because the story of how I almost lost everything starts with the story of how I built everything. It was the summer after graduation, and I was driving through the mountains outside the city, not really looking for anything specific. Just clearing my head after 6 months of job hunting and rejection letters. The architecture market was brutal that year. Firms were laying off experienced architects, let alone hiring new graduates with more passion than portfolio. I'd been living in Jordan's spare bedroom, freelancing whatever design work I could find. Logo designs for local businesses, kitchen renovation drawings for neighbors. Nothing that used my actual training, but everything that kept me fed while I figured out my next move. That's when I saw it. The for sale sign was barely visible through the overgrown weeds, leaning at an angle like it had been forgotten by time itself. But behind it, stretching up the hillside, was the most perfect piece of land I'd ever seen. 3.5 acres of rolling meadow backed by old-growth pines and facing west toward a valley that opened up like God's own amphitheater. From the highest point on the property, you could see mountains layered in blue haze stretching to the horizon. At the bottom of the slope, barely visible through the trees, was a small lake that caught the afternoon sun like a mirror. I parked on the narrow dirt road and climbed the fence. I know I should have called the realtor first, gotten permission, done things the proper way. But I couldn't help myself. This place was calling to me. I walked every inch of that property, found the natural building site about halfway up the slope where the land leveled out just enough for a foundation, but kept enough elevation for those incredible views. I could already see it in my mind. Not just a house, but a home that belonged to this specific piece of earth. The asking price was completely outside my budget. Actually, it was outside any budget I could imagine having in the next decade. But I called the realtor anyway. "It's been on the market for 8 months," she told me over the phone. "The seller is motivated. It's an estate sale and the family wants to close quickly." I drove back that evening with a notebook and my old drafting kit, sat on a fallen log as the sun set over the valley and started sketching. Not just floor plans this time, but elevation drawings, detail studies of how the house would sit on the land, window placements that would frame specific views at different times of day. I drew for 3 hours until it was too dark to see the lines on the paper. But even in the darkness, I could feel the rightness of this place. The way the house I was designing seemed to grow out of the landscape rather than being imposed on it. Jordan found me there at midnight, sitting in my car with the dome light on, still sketching. "I've been worried sick," Jordan said, sliding into the passenger seat. "You didn't answer your phone for 6 hours. "Look at this," I said, showing Jordan the pages of drawings I'd filled. "It's perfect. The house, the land, everything. This is it. This is what I'm supposed to build." Jordan studied my sketches by the dim light of the car's interior. The main house was designed around a great room with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the valley. The kitchen opened directly into the living space, but was positioned to catch the morning light and offer views of the mountains to the north. A master suite occupied one wing with private access to a deck that would be perfect for morning coffee. 2 guest rooms shared the opposite wing, each with its own view and exterior access. "It's beautiful," Jordan said finally. "But Alex, you don't have money for land, let alone construction costs." "I know, but look at this site plan. The natural drainage means minimal grading. The southern exposure is perfect for passive solar design. The existing trees provide natural windbreaks. This place wants to have a house on it." I spent the next 3 weeks putting together a business plan that had no business working. I calculated construction costs down to the last nail, researched every possible financing option, contacted every contractor I'd met during internships begging for estimates and advice. The numbers were impossible. Even with the seller agreeing to owner financing on the land, even with me doing much of the work myself, even with the most optimistic timeline and budget projections, I was still about $200,000 short of making it happen. That's when I made a decision that everyone thought was insane. I decided to build it anyway. Not the whole house at once. That was obviously impossible. But the foundation and framing, which I could finance with a construction loan if I was willing to live on the property in a trailer while I worked. The idea was to build in phases, financing each stage with the equity from the previous stage, slowly working my way up to a completed house. "You want to live in a construction trailer for 3 years?" my dad asked when I explained the plan to my family. "On a mountainside, in the middle of nowhere." "It's not the middle of nowhere," I said, spreading my drawings across my parents' kitchen table. "It's 20 minutes from town, and look at these views. Look at the way the house integrates with the natural landscape. This isn't just a building project. It's an opportunity to create something truly special." Mom picked up one of my elevation drawings, studying the clean lines and large windows. "It is beautiful," she admitted. "But honey, what if something goes wrong? What if you run out of money halfway through? What if the market crashes and you can't get financing for the next phase?" "Then I'll figure it out," I said. "But I can't spend my whole life being afraid of what might go wrong. Grandpa always said that the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all." Dad shook his head. "This isn't about taking reasonable risks. This is about betting your entire future on a dream that might not be achievable. You could rent a nice apartment, save up for a down payment on a regular house, build some financial security before you try something this ambitious." Amanda laughed from across the table. "Alex wants to live like a hermit in the woods so he can build his fantasy house. It's like something out of a reality TV show." Elena, who was visiting with Amanda, nodded along. "Wouldn't it be easier to just buy an existing house and renovate it? Something that doesn't require you to basically become a mountain man for 3 years?" They didn't understand. To them, this was about ego or impracticality or some kind of quarter-life crisis. But to me, this was about creating something that had never existed before. Something that would still be standing 50 years from now, still providing beauty and shelter and connection to the natural world long after I was gone, just like Grandpa's house. But I didn't argue with them. Instead, I put my trailer deposit down the next week. The first year was harder than I'd imagined, and I'd imagined it would be pretty hard. The site preparation alone took 3 months longer than planned. We hit bedrock 18 inches down, which meant bringing in jackhammers and additional excavation equipment. The cost overrun started immediately. Then came the first major storm. 3 days of rain that turned my building site into a mud pit and revealed drainage issues that hadn't shown up in the soil analysis. I spent a week redirecting water flow and installing French drains that weren't in the original budget. The foundation pour was supposed to happen in October. It finally happened in January during a brief warm spell between snowstorms. I stood in my insulated coveralls at 6 in the morning, watching concrete trucks navigate the temporary road I'd had to build to access the site, and wondered if I'd completely lost my mind. But when those forms came off and I could see the actual footprint of my house outlined in concrete, sitting exactly where I'd planned it, framing those views perfectly, everything made sense again. The framing went faster. I'd hired a crew for the complex structural work, but I was up on the scaffolding with them every day, learning techniques I'd only read about in textbooks. The crew chief, a guy named Roberto who'd been building houses for 30 years, started teaching me Finnish carpentry skills during lunch breaks. "You got good hands," he told me, watching me cut trim pieces with increasing accuracy. "Most architects, they know how to draw it, but they don't know how to make it. You're learning both." By spring, I had a house that looked like a house. Roof walls, windows, doors. It was still rough inside, just framing, and subfloor and exposed electrical, but from the outside it looked like something you might actually want to live in. That's when the family visit started. Mom came first, bringing a thermos of coffee and a worried expression. She walked through the space, slowly trying to envision finished rooms where she was seeing 2x4s and sawdust. "It's going to be lovely," she said, standing in what would eventually be the kitchen and looking out toward the mountains. "But, Alex, how are you going to afford to finish it? This is just the shell. You still need flooring cabinets, appliances, all the systems." She was right, of course. I was already over budget, and I hadn't even started the expensive parts yet. The custom kitchen I designed would cost $40,000. The hardwood floors I wanted would cost another $20,000. The stone fireplace, the master bathroom tile work, the deck construction, all of it was adding up to numbers that made my construction loan look like pocket change. Dad's visit was less encouraging. He showed up on a Saturday morning while I was installing insulation, wearing work clothes and ready to help, but clearly skeptical about the whole enterprise. "You know what this reminds me of," he said, looking up at the cathedral ceiling I designed for the great room. "Those TV shows where people try to flip houses and end up bankrupt because they get in over their heads." "This isn't a flip," I said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. "This is my home. I'm not trying to make a quick profit. I'm trying to build something that will last." "But at what cost?" Dad asked. "You're living in a trailer working construction jobs to pay for materials, spending every weekend for 2 years on this project. When do you actually get to enjoy the life you're building?" It was a fair question. I was working 60-hour weeks at whatever construction jobs I could find, coming home to my trailer exhausted and covered in sawdust, spending my Saturdays and Sundays doing finish work by myself because I couldn't afford to hire help for everything. Amanda and Elena visited together, treating it like a field trip to see the crazy thing their relative was building in the mountains. They spent most of the visit taking selfies against the mountain views and asking if I had Wi-Fi yet. "It's very rustic," Amanda said, looking around the space that was still just subfloor and framing. "Are you planning to put in normal flooring, or are you going for that unfinished industrial look?" "It's going to have white oak floors," I explained, showing her samples of the wood I'd ordered. "Wide planks, natural finish. And these walls will be drywall and paint with natural wood trim throughout." Elena walked over to the wall of windows facing the valley. The view is amazing, she admitted. But isn't this kind of isolated? What do you do for entertainment? For social life? I gestured toward the mountains, the lake, the endless sky. This is my entertainment, this view, this place, the process of creating something beautiful with my own hands. I don't need much else. They exchanged a look that I was starting to recognize. The look that said I'd become some kind of eccentric hermit who'd chosen trees and silence over normal human interaction. Maybe they were right, but I'd never felt more connected to anything than I felt to this place, this project, this vision that was slowly becoming reality. The real test came during year 2 when I started the finish work. I'd saved money on the framing and roofing by doing much of the work myself. But finish work was different. Tile installation, cabinet, hanging, hardwood floor, installation, all of it required skills and tools I didn't have. So I learned. I spent a month working for a tile contractor, basically paying him to teach me while I helped on his other jobs. 8 hours a day learning to cut perfect curves to set tiles level and true to grout with the patience and precision that separates amateur work from professional results. Then I came home and tiled my own bathrooms. Every evening after my day job, every weekend, slowly covering the walls I'd framed with the vision I'd been carrying in my head for 3 years. The kitchen was the biggest challenge. I designed custom cabinets that required skills I definitely didn't have, but I'd also found a cabinet shop willing to train me in exchange for helping them with their backlog of orders. For 6 months, I worked 4 10-hour days at the cabinet shop and 3 days a week on my own house. I learned to use tools I'd never seen before, developed muscles I didn't know existed, made mistakes that cost me materials and time and occasionally a fair amount of skin. But slowly, those cabinets took shape. Not just functional storage, but furniture-quality pieces that fit the space exactly that complemented the mountain views, without competing with them that would still be beautiful and sturdy 50 years from now. Jordan was my only regular visitor during this phase. Would bring dinner and sit with me while I worked, just so I'd remember to eat something that wasn't microwaved from a package. "You know you're completely obsessed, right?" Jordan said one evening, watching me sand cabinet doors for the 3rd time because I wasn't satisfied with the smoothness. "Probably," I admitted, "but look at this grain pattern. Look at how the wood catches the light from that window. This isn't just a cabinet door. It's going to be part of someone's life for decades, maybe generations. It should be perfect." "Someone's life," Jordan raised an eyebrow. "You mean your life?" "My life, my kids' lives, whoever ends up living here after me. This house is bigger than just me." Jordan was quiet for a moment, running a hand along the cabinet frame I'd just installed. "It really is beautiful," Jordan said finally. "Not just the house, but what you're doing, the way you're putting yourself into every detail. Most people buy houses. You're creating a home." That's what kept me going through the hardest parts. The knowledge that I wasn't just building a place to live, but creating something that would matter, something that would stand as proof that beauty and craftsmanship and attention to detail still had value in a world that seemed increasingly focused on speed and convenience and disposability. The deck was the last major piece. A wraparound structure that connected the indoor and outdoor spaces with different levels for different activities and sightlines that took advantage of every view. I designed it to feel like a natural extension of the living space with built-in seating and planters that would eventually be filled with native plants. By the time I started building it, I'd been living on the property for almost 3 years. I'd learned skills I never thought I'd need. I'd developed relationships with suppliers who'd begun to trust my vision and work with me on payment schedules that fit my unconventional financing situation. More importantly, I'd proven to myself that the impossible was just difficult. The day I installed the last piece of decking, I invited my family up for what I called a soft opening. The house wasn't completely finished. I still needed to install light fixtures, finish the basement, complete the landscaping. But it was livable. More than livable. It was exactly what I'd envisioned 4 years earlier when I'd sat on that fallen log and sketched by sunset light. They came reluctantly prepared to be politely supportive of what they still saw as an expensive hobby that had gotten out of hand. But when they walked through those front doors and saw the great room opening up to the valley view when they stood in the kitchen and felt how the space flowed from cooking to dining to relaxing without losing its connection to the outdoors, when they stepped onto the deck and watched the sunset over mountains that stretched to the horizon, I saw their attitudes shift. "Alex," Mom said quietly, standing at the railing and looking out over the valley. "This is incredible. I had no idea it would be like this." Dad walked through the house, slowly running his hands along the trim work I'd installed by hand, opening and closing cabinet doors to test their operation, checking the fit, and finish with the eye of someone who understood quality craftsmanship. "You built this yourself?" he asked, not quite believing it. "Most of it," I said. "I had help with the foundation and framing, and I hired specialists for the electrical and plumbing. But everything you can see, all the finish work, I did myself." Even Amanda seemed impressed despite herself. She kept taking photos of the views, the details, the way the light moved through the space as the sun shifted across the sky. "I have to admit," she said finally, "this is not what I expected. I thought you were building some kind of cabin in the woods. This is like something out of a magazine." Elena nodded, exploring the master suite with its private deck and mountain views. "How much would a house like this cost if you bought it finished?" I'd done that calculation many times over the past 4 years. "Probably close to $1 million, I said. "For the land, the house, the quality of construction and finishes." "And how much did you actually spend?" "About $350,000, plus 4 years of my life and probably 10,000 hours of labor." The silence that followed felt different than the skeptical silences I'd gotten used to from them. This felt like respect. "You know what this means, don't you?" Dad said, looking around the space with something like pride. "You're not just an architect anymore. You're a developer. You've proven you can take a concept from design through completion, manage budgets and schedules, and subcontractors create something that adds real value." He was right. But more than that, I'd proven something to myself. That I could turn a vision into reality through nothing but persistence and willingness to learn and refusal to accept that something was impossible just because it was difficult. What I didn't know was that this house, this proof of what I could accomplish, would soon become the center of a family crisis that would test everything I thought I knew about loyalty and love and what it means to earn something versus inherit it. Because 3 months after that family celebration, Grandpa died, and suddenly, my little mountain retreat wasn't just a personal achievement. It was leverage. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday afternoon in October, about 6 months before Grandpa died. I was working on the final details of the master bathroom, installing the custom mirror I'd had made to fit the space perfectly, when I heard voices outside. Not unusual, since delivery trucks and subcontractors were still coming and going regularly. But these voices were familiar. I looked out the bathroom window and saw Amanda's car parked in my driveway. She was standing on my deck with 2 other women I didn't recognize, all 3 of them looking out over the valley and talking animatedly. I walked outside, still holding the level I'd been using to hang the mirror. "Amanda, what are you doing here?" She turned around with that bright smile she used when she wanted something. "Alex, I hope you don't mind us dropping by. I was telling my friends about your incredible house, and they insisted on seeing it for themselves." The 2 women with her stepped forward. One was about Amanda's age, tall and blonde with the kind of expensive haircut that screamed wedding planning mode. The other was slightly older, wearing a business suit despite being on a mountain construction site. "This is Elena," Amanda said, indicating the blonde woman. "My maid of honor, and this is Brooke, my wedding planner." Wedding planner. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Nice to meet you," I said carefully. But I'm kind of in the middle of some detailed work. Maybe you could come back another time when I can give you a proper tour. Oh, we don't need a tour, Brooke said, pulling out a tablet and stylus. We're just taking some measurements and photos for planning purposes. Planning purposes for what? Amanda laughed, that tinkling sound she made when she was nervous but trying to seem casual. Just gathering ideas. You know how it is when you're planning a wedding. You look at every beautiful space and imagine how it could work for your big day. Elena was already walking around the deck, making notes on her phone, and occasionally holding up her hands to frame different views. The sightlines from here are incredible, she said to Brooke. You could set up the ceremony area right here facing the mountains and have cocktails down on the lower level. The great room would be perfect for the reception, Brooke agreed, peering through the windows. How many people would you say this space could accommodate? I looked at Amanda, who was suddenly very interested in examining my deck railing. Amanda, are you planning to have your wedding here? Not necessarily, she said quickly. I mean, we're looking at a lot of different venues. This is just one possibility we're exploring. Without asking me first. Well, we're family, she said, as if that explained everything. And you're always so generous. Remember when we were kids and you let me use your art supplies for my school projects? I remembered. I also remembered that she'd never asked permission for that either, and that she'd used up my expensive colored pencils on a poster about recycling that she'd thrown away the day after getting her grade. Elena had moved on to pacing off distances in the great room, counting steps and making notes. The flow from the kitchen to the main space is perfect for catering setup, she called out to Brooke. Elena, please don't measure my living room without permission, I said, following her inside. Oh, sorry, she said, not sounding sorry at all. I just get excited about beautiful spaces. You can see the potential, can't you? This place would be absolutely magical for a wedding. Brooke was taking photos of every angle, every corner, every detail I'd spent 4 years perfecting. The lighting is exceptional, she said. Natural light during the day, and those pendant lights over the kitchen island would create perfect ambiance for an evening reception. How many people are you planning to invite? I asked Amanda, who had followed us inside. It's not definite, she said again. We're just exploring options, but probably around 150 guests. 150 people. In my house, the house I'd built as a sanctuary, a place of peace and quiet, and connection to the natural world. Amanda, this isn't a venue, I said. This is my home. I live here. I know that, she said, sounding slightly offended. I'm not talking about renting it or anything commercial like that. I'm talking about family helping family. You'd be hosting, not running a business. Jordan's truck pulled into the driveway at that moment, and I felt a surge of relief. Jordan had promised to stop by after work to help me hang the new bathroom mirror, but right now I needed moral support more than manual labor. Jordan walked in to find Brooke photographing my custom kitchen cabinets, while Elena measured the dining area and Amanda stood in the middle of it, all looking like she was mentally rearranging my furniture. What's going on? Jordan asked quietly, moving to stand next to me. Wedding planning, I said. Apparently. Jordan looked around at the 3 women treating my house like a venue space, and I saw that familiar protective expression cross Jordan's face. Interesting approach to asking permission. Amanda heard that and turned to face us both. I'm not doing anything wrong. We're just looking at possibilities. Alex, you should be flattered that I think your house is beautiful enough to host the most important day of my life. It is beautiful, Elena chimed in. And the mountain setting would be incredible for photos. Plus, think about how much money you'd save not having to rent a traditional venue. There it was. The real reason, not because my house was special or meaningful, but because it was free. Brooke had moved on to examining my deck railing for what I assumed were safety and capacity considerations. We'd need to bring in additional bathroom facilities, she said, making notes on her tablet. And probably a generator for extra power for the catering equipment and band setup. Band setup, I repeated. Well, you can't have a wedding without music, Amanda said. Just a small band, maybe 5 or 6 pieces. They wouldn't take up much room. Jordan stepped forward. Amanda, I think you should discuss this with Alex privately before making any more plans. What's to discuss? Amanda asked. It's just family. Alex loves me. He wants me to be happy. I did love Amanda. Despite everything, despite the years of feeling like I came second in our family's priorities, despite the casual way she'd always assumed my things were available for her use, I did want her to be happy. But I also love this house. This space that represented everything I'd worked for, everything I'd proved I could accomplish. The idea of filling it with 150 strangers, of turning it into a party venue, even for one day, felt like a violation of something sacred. Can we talk outside for a minute? I asked Amanda. She sighed but followed me onto the deck, leaving Elena and Brooke to continue their measurements and photography inside. Amanda, I need you to understand something, I said once we were alone. This house isn't just a pretty building to me. It represents 4 years of my life. Every board, every tile, every fixture was chosen and installed with intention. This is my sanctuary. I know that, she said. That's what would make it so special for the wedding. It's not just some generic venue. It's a place that means something to our family. But you didn't ask me. You brought a wedding planner to my house without even discussing it with me first. Amanda looked genuinely confused. I didn't think I needed to ask permission to visit my cousin's house. You didn't come to visit. You came to scout a location. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment, looking out over the valley. Alex, do you have any idea how much weddings cost these days? The cheapest decent venue I found is $8,000 just for the space rental. That doesn't include catering, flowers, decorations, anything else. My parents have already spent a fortune on this wedding, and grandmother left them expenses they're still dealing with. This was news to me. What expenses? Medical bills, mostly. Her insurance didn't cover everything. Plus the funeral costs settling her estate. Mom and Dad have been struggling more than they've let on. I felt a stab of guilt. I'd been so focused on my own projects, my own struggles, that I hadn't paid attention to what my aunt and uncle might be going through. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't know things were tight for them. It's not your fault, Amanda said, but you can see why having the wedding here would be such a huge help. It would save us thousands of dollars that we could use for other things, like maybe a down payment on a house. Inside, I could hear Elena and Brooke discussing catering logistics and talking about where to set up a dance floor. The casual way they were planning to reorganize my life made my teeth clench. Amanda, even if I was open to this, we'd need to talk about a lot of details. Insurance liability, what happens if something gets damaged, how we handle the impact on my neighbors, all kinds of practical considerations. Of course, she said quickly. We'd work all that out. Brooke is really professional. She's handled events in private homes before. She knows how to manage all the logistics. Jordan appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but Brooke is asking about electrical capacity for sound equipment, and Elena wants to know if you have blueprints showing the load-bearing capacity of the deck. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This was escalating way beyond a casual family conversation. Ladies, I called into the house. I think we need to slow this down a bit. Brooke and Elena came back outside, tablets and measuring tapes in hand, looking like they'd accomplished a successful reconnaissance mission. We've got everything we need for now, Brooke announced. I'll put together a preliminary proposal with layout options and vendor requirements. When would be a good time to schedule a follow-up meeting? There isn't going to be a follow-up meeting, I said. Not until Amanda and I have had a chance to discuss this properly. Amanda's face fell. Alex, the wedding is in 8 months. If we're going to do this, we need to start planning now. All the good vendors get booked early. Oh, which is exactly why you should have talked to me before bringing a wedding planner to my house, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Elena stepped forward with a sympathetic smile. I understand this is sudden, but Alex, you have to admit this place is absolutely perfect for a wedding. The views, the layout, The natural beauty. Amanda would be crazy not to consider it. And you'd be helping family, Brooke added. There's something really special about that. Plus, think about the memories you'd be creating. Years from now, every time Amanda and her husband look at their wedding photos, they'll be reminded of your generosity. The pressure was subtle, but unmistakable. They weren't just asking me to host a wedding. They were telling me that refusing would make me a selfish family member who prioritized my own comfort over Amanda's happiness. Jordan moved to stand next to me, a silent show of support that I appreciated more than I could express. I think Alex needs some time to consider this, Jordan said diplomatically. It's a big decision, and it shouldn't be rushed. Amanda looked from Jordan to me, and I could see her starting to realize that this wasn't going to be as easy as she'd assumed. Of course, she said finally. Take all the time you need, but Alex, please remember that this isn't just about me. It's about family. It's about helping each other when we can. After they left Jordan, and I sat on the deck in silence for a long time, watching the sunset over the mountains. What are you thinking? Jordan asked finally. I'm thinking that I love Amanda, but I don't trust her motives, I said. This whole thing felt calculated, like she'd already decided this was happening and was just going through the motions of asking permission. The wedding planner was definitely a red flag, Jordan agreed. You don't bring a professional to scout a location unless you're already pretty committed to using it. And the way they were measuring everything, taking photos, discussing logistics like it was a done deal, they made me feel like a landlord in my own house. Jordan nodded. What are you going to tell her? I thought about that for a long time. On one hand, Amanda was family, and families help each other. If hosting her wedding would save her thousands of dollars and create meaningful memories, shouldn't I be willing to make that sacrifice? On the other hand, this house represented everything I'd worked for, everything I'd proved I could accomplish. It was my refuge, my sanctuary, the place where I came to recharge and find peace. The idea of turning it into a party venue, even for one day, felt like a betrayal of everything it meant to me. I think I'm going to tell her no, I said, finally. Jordan was quiet for a moment. Are you sure? Because once you say no, there's no taking it back. And Amanda doesn't strike me as someone who takes rejection gracefully. What's that supposed to mean? Just that she seems pretty invested in this idea. And people who are used to getting what they want don't usually give up easily when someone tells them no. I looked at Jordan, seeing something in their expression that made me uneasy. You think she's going to cause problems? I think you should be careful, Jordan said. This house is your biggest asset. It's also your biggest vulnerability. Don't let anyone use it as leverage against you. At the time, I thought Jordan was being overly cautious. Amanda might be spoiled and presumptuous, but she wasn't malicious. She was family. Whatever issues we might have about the wedding venue, we'd work them out like family members do. What I didn't understand was that Amanda had already moved beyond asking permission. She'd moved on to taking what she wanted, and my house, my beautiful sanctuary that I'd built with my own hands, was about to become the center of a family war that would change everything. I thought I knew about love and loyalty and what it really means to earn something versus inherit it. 3 weeks later, I woke up to the sound of diesel engines rumbling up my mountain road. It was 7:30 on a Saturday morning. I'd been planning to sleep in, then spend the day installing the last of the light fixtures in the guest bathroom. Quiet, peaceful work that didn't require anyone else's input or approval. But the rumbling got louder and I could hear voices, multiple vehicles, the distinct beeping of something large backing up. I pulled on jeans and a t-shirt and walked outside to find 3 trucks parked in my driveway. A moving van, a panel truck with premier event design painted on the side, and Amanda's car. Amanda herself was standing on my deck directing 2 men in coveralls as they carried my living room furniture outside. "Careful with that sofa," she called out. "It's expensive." It was expensive. I'd saved for 8 months to buy it, and these strangers were carrying it out of my house like it was their job. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted, running toward them. Amanda turned around with that same bright smile I'd seen 3 weeks earlier. "Oh, good, you're awake. I was hoping you'd be up early so you could help coordinate everything." "Coordinate what? Why are people moving my furniture?" "We're just making some adjustments for the wedding setup," she said, like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Brooke says we need to clear the main space for the ceremony arrangements, and then we can put everything back afterward." I looked around my property in complete disbelief. The moving crew was systematically emptying my house. My dining table was sitting on the lawn. My custom coffee table, the one I'd built myself from reclaimed wood, was leaning against a tree. "Amanda, I never agreed to host your wedding." "Of course you did," she said, looking genuinely confused. "Dad told me you'd agreed to everything." "Dad told you what?" Before she could answer, I heard another vehicle coming up the road. Dad's truck followed by Mom's SUV. They parked behind the other vehicles and got out looking like they were here for a family work party. Dad walked over carrying a thermos of coffee and a clipboard. "Morning, Alex. Looks like things are getting started right on schedule." "Schedule for what?" Mom gave me a hug and handed me a cup of coffee. "For the wedding preparations, honey. Amanda told us you'd offered to host the ceremony here. It's such a generous thing to do." I stared at both of them, trying to process what was happening. "I never offered anything. I told Amanda I needed time to think about it." "Well, time's up," Amanda said, pulling out her own clipboard. "The wedding is in 6 months, and if we're going to pull this together, we need to start now." The moving crew had finished with the living room and was starting on the dining area. One of them approached Amanda with a question about my china cabinet. "Just store it all carefully," she told him. "We'll need the space completely clear for the catering setup." "Stop," I said loud enough that everyone turned to look at me. "Everyone stop what you're doing right now." The moving crew looked confused, glancing between me and Amanda like they weren't sure who was actually in charge. "Amanda, I need to talk to you privately. Right now." "Can't it wait?" she asked. "We've got a lot to accomplish today, and I'm paying these guys by the hour." "You're paying them to move my furniture out of my house without my permission." "No, it can't wait." Dad stepped forward. "Alex, what's the problem? Amanda said you'd agreed to host the wedding. If you've changed your mind, you need to speak up before people start spending money and making commitments." "I never agreed to anything," I said. "When did Amanda tell you I'd agreed?" Mom looked confused. "She called us last week and said you'd worked everything out, that you were excited to host the ceremony, and that we should come help with the preparations." I looked at Amanda, who was suddenly very interested in something on her clipboard. "Amanda, is that what you told them?" "I told them we'd discussed it and that you were considering it," she said defensively. "And then when you didn't call to say no, I assumed you'd decided yes." "You assumed wrong." Jason's car pulled up at that moment. Amanda's fiancé got out looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, which was pretty much his default expression whenever wedding planning was involved. "Hey everyone," he said, walking over to where we were standing. "Amanda, I thought you said Alex was excited about hosting the wedding. He doesn't look excited." "He's just having some last-minute jitters," Amanda said quickly. "It's a big responsibility hosting such an important event." "It's not jitters," I said. "It's the fact that I never agreed to this." Jason looked from Amanda to me and back again. "Wait, what?" At that moment, Jordan's truck appeared at the bottom of my driveway. I'd never been so happy to see anyone in my life. Jordan parked and walked up to our group, taking in the moving trucks, the furniture scattered across my lawn, and the family tension that was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Interesting morning," Jordan said carefully. "What's happening here?" "Wedding preparations," Dad said. "Alex offered to host Amanda's ceremony, and we're helping get the space ready." "Alex offered," Jordan looked at me with raised eyebrows. "No," I said firmly. "Alex did not offer." Amanda was starting to look less confident and more defensive. "Alex, you can't back out now. I've already put deposits down with vendors. I've told all my friends the wedding is going to be here. You can't just change your mind at the last minute." What deposits?" "The caterer, the florist, the photographer. everyone who needs to know the venue location. I had to give them your address so they could start planning their logistics. My blood pressure was climbing toward dangerous levels. You gave my address to vendors without asking me. I had to, she said. These people are professionals. They need to see the space, understand the layout, coordinate their services. You can't just spring a venue change on them a week before the wedding. The wedding is in 6 months, which is practically last minute in wedding planning terms. Jordan stepped closer to me. Alex, where are your property documents? What property documents? Deed, title, insurance papers, anything that proves you own this house. I suddenly understood what Jordan was getting at. They're in my office. Why? Because I think you're going to need them. Dad looked confused. Need them for what, Alex? What's this about? It's about the fact that this is my house, I said. My property, my deed, my mortgage, my decision who gets to use it and when. Amanda laughed, but it didn't sound natural. Of course it's your house. No one is saying it isn't. But Alex, we're family. Family helps family. You can't seriously be considering making me find another venue 6 months before my wedding. I'm not making you do anything, I said. You made the decision to assume this was happening without actually getting my permission. The event design crew had started unloading equipment from their truck. Chairs, tables, what looked like pieces of a temporary dance floor. They were setting everything up on my lawn like this was a done deal. Excuse me, I called out to the crew chief. Who hired you? Ms. Rodriguez, he said, pointing at Amanda. We're setting up for the venue walkthrough. Well, Ms. Rodriguez doesn't have authority to hire anyone to work on this property. You need to pack up your equipment and leave. The crew chief looked confused. Ma'am, he said to Amanda, we've got a signed contract and a deposit. Amanda's face was getting red. Alex, you're embarrassing me in front of professional vendors. Can we please discuss this privately? No, I said. Because every time we discuss things privately, you somehow interpret that as permission to move forward with plans I haven't approved. Mom stepped forward. Alex, honey, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Amanda told us you'd agreed to host the wedding. If that's not true, then someone needs to explain what's actually happening here. What's happening, Jordan said, is that Amanda assumed she could use Alex's property without permission, and now she's trying to pressure him into going along with it by involving the whole family. Dad frowned. That's a pretty serious accusation. It's not an accusation, I said. It's exactly what happened. I told Amanda I needed time to think about hosting her wedding. Instead of waiting for an answer, she hired vendors, told family members I'd agreed, and showed up this morning with moving trucks. Jason had been quiet through all of this, but now he stepped forward. Amanda, is that true? I didn't do anything wrong, Amanda said. Alex was considering it. I just moved things along. By lying to our families and hiring vendors without permission? I didn't lie. I just interpreted Alex's silence as agreement. That's not how consent works, Jordan said quietly. Dad looked like he was starting to understand the situation. Amanda, did you actually get Alex's permission before making these arrangements? I got his consideration, she said, which is more than most family members would require. Alex, you're acting like I'm some stranger trying to steal your house. I'm your cousin. I've known you my whole life. I thought I could count on you to help me with the most important day of my life. The emotional manipulation was expertly done. Paint me as the selfish family member who was prioritizing my own comfort over her happiness. Make everyone feel like refusing her request would be a betrayal of family loyalty. But I'd spent 4 years building this house. I'd put everything I had into creating this space, and I wasn't going to let anyone, family or not, take it over without my permission. Jordan's right, I said. I need to get my documentation. I walked into my house, which was now almost completely empty, thanks to the moving crew, and grabbed the folder of papers I kept in my office safe. Deed title, insurance, mortgage documents, construction contracts, everything that proved this property was mine. When I came back outside, the family conversation had gotten more intense. Jason was arguing with Amanda in low voices while Mom and Dad stood off to the side looking confused and uncomfortable. Here, I said, handing the folder to Dad. Deed, title, mortgage papers, construction contracts. Everything is in my name. I own this property outright except for the construction loan which I've been paying on schedule for 4 years. Dad opened the folder and examined the documents carefully. Alex, no one is questioning that you own the house. Then why is everyone acting like Amanda has the right to use it without asking? Because she said you'd agreed, Mom said. Honey, if you didn't want to host the wedding, why didn't you just say no? Because I was trying to be diplomatic about it, I said. And because I thought Amanda would respect my need to think about such a big decision before committing to anything. Amanda had finished her argument with Jason and was walking back toward our group. She looked like she'd been crying, but she also looked angry. Alex, I need you to understand something, she said. I've already put $5,000 in deposits down for this wedding. Money I can't get back if I have to change venues now. Are you really going to force me to lose that money? You put deposits down without my permission, I said. That was your choice, not mine. But I'm your family. Being family doesn't give you the right to make decisions about my property without asking me. Jason stepped forward. Amanda, I think Alex is right. You should have gotten a definitive yes before putting any money down. Amanda stared at her fiancé like he'd just betrayed her. Whose side are you on? I'm on the side of doing the right thing, Jason said. And the right thing was asking permission before spending money and hiring vendors. I can't believe this, Amanda said. My own fiancé is taking Alex's side over mine. It's not about taking sides, Jason said. It's about respecting other people's property and decisions. The moving crew and event designers were standing around looking uncomfortable, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Their equipment was half unloaded, my furniture was scattered across the lawn, and the family drama was escalating by the minute. Look, I said, trying to find a compromise that would defuse the situation. I'm not trying to ruin your wedding, Amanda, but I can't have you making decisions about my property without involving me. If you want to discuss hosting your wedding here, we can do that. But it has to be an actual discussion, not an assumption, followed by a fait accompli. A what? Amanda asked. A done deal, Jordan translated. Alex is saying you can't just decide something is happening and then force everyone else to go along with it. Dad nodded. That's fair, Amanda. You should have talked to Alex before making any commitments. Amanda looked around at all of us and I could see her realizing that she'd overplayed her hand. The family support she'd been counting on wasn't materializing the way she'd expected. Fine, she said finally, but I'm not canceling these vendors, and I'm not losing my deposits. So Alex, you need to decide right now, are you going to host my wedding or not? That's not how this works, I said. You don't get to create a crisis and then demand an immediate decision to resolve it. The crisis already exists, she said. I've got vendors waiting deposits, paid family members who've cleared their schedules. You can either be part of the solution or part of the problem. Jordan stepped closer to me. Alex, you don't owe anyone an immediate decision about your own property. Stay out of this, Amanda snapped at Jordan. This is family business. Jordan is my family, I said. More than some blood relatives have been lately. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Mom looked hurt. Dad looked disappointed, and Amanda looked furious. I think everyone needs to take a step back, Jason said finally. Amanda, you made a mistake by not getting clear permission before hiring vendors. Alex, your cousin, is in a difficult situation, partly because of that mistake. Maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone. The solution is simple, Amanda said. Alex hosts my wedding like family should, and everyone's happy. Except Alex, Jordan pointed out, who never wanted to host a wedding in his house in the first place. I realized that everyone was looking at me waiting for a decision. The vendors were standing around being paid by the hour. My furniture was sitting on the lawn. My family was divided into camps, and Amanda was using her wedding as emotional leverage to get what she wanted. No, I said finally. No what? Amanda asked. No, I'm not hosting your wedding. No, you can't use my house. No, you can't move my furniture around without permission. No to all of it. Amanda's face went white, then red. You're serious. Completely serious. She looked at Dad. Are you going to let him do this to me? Dad looked uncomfortable, but stood his ground. Amanda, it's Alex's house. He has the right to say no. She looked at Mom. What about you? Are you going to stand by and watch Alex ruin my wedding? Mom sighed. Honey, I wish you'd handled this differently. Alex isn't trying to hurt you. He's just protecting his own interests. Amanda turned to Jason, her last hope for support. Well, Jason was quiet for a long moment. I think Alex is being reasonable, he said finally. And I think you need to apologize for overstepping. That was the final straw. Amanda exploded. I can't believe this. My own family is turning against me. My own fiancé is taking my cousin's side. All because I wanted to have my wedding in a beautiful place instead of some generic banquet hall. It's not about the location, I said. It's about respect and permission, and not assuming you can take whatever you want just because we're related. Fine, Amanda said, tears streaming down her face. Fine, I'll find another venue. I'll lose my deposits. I'll disappoint all my guests who were looking forward to a mountain wedding. I'll settle for whatever generic space I can find 6 months before the wedding. Are you happy now? I'm not happy about any of this, I said. But I'm glad you finally understand that this is my decision to make. Amanda walked over to the moving crew chief. Put everything back, she said. All of it. Exactly where you found it. Then she turned to the event design crew. Pack up your equipment. The venue has been changed. Finally, she looked at me. I hope you're satisfied, Alex. I hope your precious house is worth destroying our relationship over. She got in her car and drove away, leaving the rest of us to deal with the aftermath. It took 3 hours to get all my furniture back inside and arranged properly. The moving crew was professional about it, but I could tell they thought the whole situation was ridiculous. The event design crew packed up their equipment with the efficient resignation of people who dealt with difficult clients before. When everyone was gone, except Jordan, Mom, Dad, and Jason, we sat on my deck and tried to process what had just happened. I think you handled that well, Jason said finally. Amanda was out of line. Dad nodded reluctantly. She should have asked permission before making any commitments. But Alex, she's still your cousin. And she's still getting married in 6 months. I know, I said. And I hope she finds a venue that makes her happy. But it's not going to be my house. Mom squeezed my hand. She'll get over it. Amanda's always been dramatic when she doesn't get her way. Give her some time to cool down and I'm sure she'll apologize. I wasn't so sure about that. The look Amanda had given me before driving away wasn't the look of someone who was planning to apologize anytime soon. Jordan waited until my parents and Jason had left before speaking up. You know, this isn't over right. What do you mean? I mean, Amanda isn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She's going to find another way to get what she wants. Like what? Jordan looked out over the valley thinking. I don't know yet. But people who are used to getting their way don't usually give up after one confrontation. They just get more creative about their approach. I should have listened to Jordan's warning more carefully. Because 3 weeks later, Grandpa died. And suddenly my refusal to host Amanda's wedding became a family betrayal that would be used against me in ways I never could have imagined. So remember that phone call from Jordan I mentioned at the beginning? The one that came at 3 a.m. with information that would change everything. Well, it turns out that Jordan's research into Grandpa's property had uncovered something no one in my family knew. Something that explained why he'd been so determined to leave the house to me, and why my relative's legal challenge was doomed from the start. The original land grant for Grandpa's property had included a clause that restricted ownership to direct descendants who had demonstrated substantial contribution to the maintenance and improvement of the property. A clause that had been forgotten by everyone except the county records office and one very thorough researcher who happened to care about my future. My 3-year live-in arrangement taking care of Grandpa combined with the documented improvements I'd made to the house and grounds meant I was the only family member who legally qualified to inherit under the original deed restrictions. My cousin's legal challenge collapsed overnight. But more importantly, the whole experience taught me something about the difference between earning something and expecting it, between building relationships and assuming they'll always be there, between creating value and just trying to claim it. The victory felt hollow at first. I'd won the legal battle, but I'd lost something else in the process. The naive belief that family loyalty was automatic and unconditional. It took months to rebuild those relationships, and some of them never fully recovered, but others became stronger than they'd ever been. 6 months after the court case ended, I decided to throw a housewarming party. Not for my mountain house, which had been my home for years, but for Grandpa's house, which I was finally ready to make truly my own. I invited everyone who'd supported me through the legal nightmare. Jordan, of course, plus the contractor who'd testified about my work on the property, the neighbors who'd witnessed my care for Grandpa, and a handful of friends who'd listened to me vent my frustrations over too many late-night phone calls. I did not invite my extended family. That bridge was still under reconstruction. The party was small and intimate, exactly the opposite of the chaotic wedding takeover Amanda had planned for my mountain house. We grilled burgers on the back patio, played acoustic guitar in the living room, and spent hours talking about everything except legal battles and family drama. "You know what I love about this place," Jordan said, standing in Grandpa's workshop and running a hand along the workbench he'd built in 1958. "It feels like him, like his personality is still here in all the details he cared about." Jordan was right. Unlike my mountain house, which reflected my own vision and aesthetics, Grandpa's house was a collaboration between past and present. My job wasn't to impose my own style, but to honor his while adding my own touches where they belonged. I'd spent months learning the house's rhythms, which windows caught the best light at different times of day, how the heating system worked most efficiently, where Grandpa had hidden spare keys and secret storage spaces that weren't obvious from the blueprints. But I'd also made changes, updated the kitchen appliances while keeping the original cabinets, refinished the hardwood floors to bring back their original luster, added modern lighting that complemented the vintage fixtures Grandpa had chosen decades earlier. The house was becoming ours, mine and his past and present tradition and innovation. 3 weeks after the housewarming party, Dad showed up at my door. Alone. "Can we talk?" he asked, looking more uncomfortable than I'd seen him since my teenage years. We sat on Grandpa's front porch, drinking coffee from mugs that had been in the family since I was a kid. Dad was quiet for a long time, looking out at the garden I'd been slowly restoring to match Grandpa's original landscape plans. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "For what?" "For not believing you about Amanda, for assuming you were being unreasonable about the wedding venue, for not supporting you when you needed it most." I set down my coffee mug, surprised by the directness of his admission. "Dad, you were in a difficult position. Amanda is your niece too." "But you're my son," he said, "and I should have listened to your side of the story before taking anyone else's word for what had happened." We sat in silence for a moment, watching a cardinal build a nest in the oak tree Grandpa had planted when Dad was a teenager. "There's something else," Dad said. "Something I should have told you months ago." I waited. "Your uncle and aunt have been struggling financially. More than they've let on. The medical bills from your grandmother's final illness, plus some bad investment decisions, plus the cost of Amanda's wedding. They've been under a lot of pressure." I figured it was something like that. When Amanda came up with the idea of using your house for the wedding, it wasn't just about the venue. It was about saving money they literally didn't have. I think she convinced herself that you owed the family that help. Dad paused, struggling with how to explain something he didn't entirely understand himself. "That doesn't excuse what she did," he continued, "but it might explain why she was so desperate to make it happen. and why she was so angry when you said no. Why are you telling me this now? Because I want you to understand that the legal challenge wasn't just about greed or entitlement. It was about fear. Fear that they were going to lose everything, and maybe if they could get a piece of Grandpa's estate, they could solve their problems. I thought about this for a long time. It didn't change what had happened, but it did make the whole situation feel less personal. Less like a betrayal and more like desperation. Are they going to be okay? I asked. I think so. Your uncle got a new job with better benefits. Amanda postponed the wedding and scaled back her plans significantly. They're learning to live within their means instead of trying to maintain appearances they couldn't afford. Dad finished his coffee and stood up to leave. But then he turned back. Alex, I'm proud of what you've built. Both houses your career the way you handled all this family drama with more grace than most of us deserved. Grandpa would be proud too. That was the conversation that started healing our relationship. Not all at once, but gradually, like trust rebuilt one honest conversation at a time. 2 months later, I got an email from Amanda. The subject line was, "I owe you an apology." I almost deleted it without reading it. I wasn't ready for more family drama, and I definitely wasn't ready for a half-hearted apology that was really just another attempt to get something from me. But curiosity won out. Alex, the email began, I've been thinking about what happened with the wedding venue situation, and I realize I owe you a real apology, not for wanting to use your house, but for the way I went about it. You were right when you said I should have asked permission instead of assuming it was okay to move forward with plans. She went on to explain that she'd found a new venue, a restored barn about an hour away, that was actually perfect for the kind of wedding she and Jason really wanted. Smaller, more intimate, less expensive, and more aligned with their actual values, rather than the Instagram-worthy spectacle she'd been planning. The truth is, she wrote, I was so caught up in trying to have the perfect wedding that I lost sight of what was actually important, which is marrying Jason, celebrating with people we love, and starting our life together. All of that can happen in any venue. But the part of the email that surprised me most came at the end. I know this is a lot to ask after everything that happened, but I wondered if you might be willing to help me with something. The new venue needs some modifications to work for our ceremony, and I can't afford to hire a professional architect. Would you be willing to look at the space and maybe suggest some simple changes that would make it work better? I'd pay you for your time, of course. And I'd completely understand if you said no. I stared at that email for a long time. This was Amanda asking for my professional help, not assuming she could get it for free because we were family, not trying to guilt me into saying yes, just asking straightforwardly and acknowledging that I had every right to refuse. I drove out to look at the barn the following weekend. It was a beautiful space built in the 1940s and recently restored by a couple who rented it out for events. The bones were good, but Amanda was right that it needed some modifications to work for a wedding ceremony. The main issue was sightlines. The way the space was currently configured, half the guests wouldn't be able to see the ceremony area clearly. But with some simple changes, moving the entrance, adding a small platform, and reconfiguring the seating arrangement, it could work perfectly. I spent 3 hours measuring, sketching, and talking through options with Amanda and Jason. It felt good to use my professional skills to solve a problem for people I cared about, even if our relationship was still complicated. More importantly, it felt like the beginning of a real apology. Not just words, but actions. Amanda was treating me like a professional whose time and expertise had value. She was paying me fairly for my work. She was respecting my boundaries and my decision-making process. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. The wedding happened 4 months later. I didn't attend by mutual agreement. Too much had happened for us to pretend everything was back to normal. But Amanda sent me photos afterward and the space looked beautiful. The modifications had worked exactly as planned and the whole event looked intimate and meaningful and genuine in a way her original mountain mansion fantasy never could have been. "Thank you," she wrote in the card that came with the photos. "Not just for the design help, but for forcing me to figure out what I actually wanted, instead of what I thought I was supposed to want." 6 months after Amanda's wedding, Jordan and I were sitting on the deck of my mountain house looking up at more stars than you can see from anywhere with significant light pollution. "Do you ever regret it?" Jordan asked. "Standing up to your family the way you did?" I thought about it for a long time. The past year had been the most difficult of my life in a lot of ways. I'd lost relationships I'd thought were permanent. I'd discovered that family loyalty had limits I'd never imagined. I'd been forced to choose between keeping the peace and protecting my own interests. But I'd also discovered things about myself that I might never have learned otherwise. "No," I said, finally. "I don't regret it. I regret that it had to happen that way. I regret that Amanda felt so desperate she was willing to risk our relationship to solve her problems. I regret that it took a legal battle for my family to take my boundaries seriously." I paused, watching a satellite track across the constellation Orion. "But I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret insisting that my consent mattered. I don't regret proving that I could build something valuable and then protect it when people tried to take it away." Jordan nodded. "You know what I think the real lesson is? What? That you can't build genuine relationships on assumptions. You can't assume that family will always support you. You can't assume that being generous once means you owe generosity forever. You can't assume that other people will respect your boundaries unless you're willing to enforce them." Jordan was right. The whole experience had taught me the difference between earned relationships and assumed ones, between people who loved me for who I was and people who loved me for what I could provide. "But here's the thing," Jordan continued. "The people who are left after you enforce your boundaries, those are the people who actually respect you. Those are the relationships worth having." I looked around at my life as it existed now, smaller in some ways, less complicated by obligation and assumption and the exhausting work of managing other people's expectations, but also more authentic, more sustainable, more genuinely connected to people who saw me as a whole person rather than just a resource to be utilized. "I think Grandpa knew," I said. "When he left me the house, I think he knew it would force me to choose between keeping everyone happy and standing up for myself." "You think he planned it?" "Maybe not the details, but I think he understood that inheriting something valuable would test every relationship in my life. And maybe he wanted me to learn which relationships could survive that test." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the mountain, owls calling to each other across the valley, the distant sound of the highway that connected this peaceful place to the larger world, the wind moving through the pine trees Grandpa had planted 50 years earlier. "So, what's next?" Jordan asked eventually. "Next, I keep building," I said. "Both houses are finally mine, really mine. I've got architectural projects lined up for the next year. I've got relationships that are based on mutual respect instead of family obligation. I've got a life that fits me instead of trying to fit into spaces other people designed for me." I stood up and walked to the deck railing, looking out over the valley where lights from distant houses twinkled like earthbound stars. "But mostly I've got the knowledge that I can build something beautiful and then protect it when necessary, that I can stand up for myself without becoming cruel or vindictive, that I can set boundaries and enforce them and still be a good person who loves his family." Jordan joined me at the railing. "Even the family members who tried to take your house away." "Especially them," I said, "because loving someone sometimes means refusing to enable their worst impulses. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no." I thought about Amanda working with her new venue and learning to plan a wedding that reflected her actual values rather than her social media aspirations. About my parents slowly rebuilding trust through honest conversations and mutual respect. About the extended family members who'd supported the legal challenge and were now learning to live with the consequences of their choices. You know what the strangest part is, I said. I'm happier now than I was before any of this happened, even though it was horrible to go through. Why? Because I know who I am now. I know what I'm capable of building and protecting. I know which relationships are worth fighting for and which ones are worth walking away from. I know that my home is really my home, and my boundaries are really my boundaries. I turned back toward the house, with its warm light spilling out through the windows I'd positioned to frame exactly these views. And I know that everything I've built, I've earned. That's the end of my story. But it's also the beginning of a question I want to ask you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Have you ever had family members who assumed they could use your success or your generosity without asking permission first? Have you ever had to enforce boundaries with people you love, even when it was painful? Because if you have, I want you to know that you're not selfish for protecting what you've built. You're not cruel for insisting that your consent matters. You're not wrong for expecting the people who love you to respect your decisions about your own life and property. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to say no. And sometimes, the most important thing you can build isn't a house or a career or a bank account. Sometimes, the most important thing you can build is the knowledge that you're strong enough to protect what matters to you, even when the people trying to take it away are people you love. Let me know in the comments what's something you've had to protect from people who thought they were entitled to it. How did you find the courage to set boundaries when it mattered most? Because I've learned that the best conversations happen when we share our real stories instead of pretending everything is always easy. And real stories, like real houses, are built one honest moment at a time. If this story taught you something about standing up for yourself, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. I share more real stories about family drama boundaries and finding your backbone every week. What's your craziest family boundary story? Drop it in the comments below.